Hello friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. We're starting this video with a story where pettiness meets horticulture and wins big. A meddling neighbor's been a nightmare for years, but when her overhanging mulberry tree starts pelting the new patio with fruit and purple bird droppings, the homeowners decide to use her one true weakness, eavesdropping. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. Mulberry madness, when fake wine takes down a real tree. My neighbor's an idiot, and we've been having issues with her from the start. 6-hour relentless dog barking 4 days a week for years, yelling at me for stealing water flowing downhill, dead rabbits on the doorstep, the usual property line arguments, emptying her toxic hot tub onto our property, lying by the hedges to spy on us, parties, noise, etc. ad nauseum. Just run-of-the-mill bad neighbor stuff. Eventually, we built a giant fence, and it's kept the bullcrap to a minimum. Both yards have plenty of mature trees. We have 3 maples over 150 years old and a nearly 100-year-old birch, a 12-foot cedar hedge. Add that to the giant fence and daylights at a minimum in our backyard in the summer. Idiot neighbor has 2-century-old trees and a very mature mulberry tree that hung over the fence in the only area that enjoys direct sunlight. Now, this part is entirely our fault. One spring, we built a patio there with light gray stone. The mulberry tree has dark purple fruit, and hers is extremely prolific. The week construction was finished was the week the berries ripened and began to drop in the slightest breeze. Sitting out there for any length of time, and you'd be pelted with berries, leaving purple stains like you were shot with a paintball, and sweeping a path was the only way to not step on them. If this only lasted for a few weeks, it'd be tolerable, but mulberries are in season all summer. The amount of birds that feasted on the fruit and promptly deposited bright purple bird crap on everything we owned outside was unbelievable. Purple bird crap drip dried everywhere on the patio and beyond. We started putting tarps over the entire patio to collect the bird dung-coated berries and emptying them into a bucket every time we wanted to use the patio. Remembering our neighbor's penchant for eavesdropping, I began to talk about mulberry wine, about how good my mulberry wine was and how this year's bumper crop of mulberries was going to make so much wine and how we were going to go on vacation with all the money I was making from selling my mulberry moonshine. Visitors joined in the act, claiming they could not wait for their allotment of my famous mulberry wine and offering bribes to be moved up the list. I do not make mulberry wine, never have, and wouldn't start with mulberry bird poop wine. One rainy early summer night, I heard and felt a tremendous crash. I ran into the backyard. The largest limb from the mulberry tree was lying in my backyard. A chainsaw was sputtering on the other side of my giant fence. The mulberry tree was coming down at night in a rainstorm. More evidence of her idiocy. There was a bit of yelling back and forth through the fence, me about her being a dangerous moron and her about me having a nice vacation without having mulberry wine to sell. She continued to cut down the whole tree instead of just the limbs hanging over our property. I laughed myself into the house, not quite believing my ruse worked so well and revenge was finally mine. But that poor tree died needlessly. Barely a month later, a vicious storm blew through our area, splitting one of our mature trees in half and damaging the other so badly it had to be removed. Now the idiot has no trees, but all mine are still standing. Now when you're outside, have loud conversations about how the mulberry wine market cratered out, and thank God that tree went down before you financed this year's operation. How in hindsight, that tree coming down saved you from financial ruin. And our second story. My landlord tried to raise my rent over his own management company's mistake. His greed cost him a month's rent. This happened a while ago, shortly after I relocated to a new city. I just signed a 1-year lease for a townhouse in the downtown core. The area was great, walkable, close to work, lots of cafes and parks. The townhouse itself was fine. Not terrible, not amazing. Definitely a little more worn down than it appeared during the showing, but whatever. Caveat emptor and all that. One detail in the lease stuck with me. The security deposit wasn't actually a damage deposit. It was designated as last month's rent. The lease explicitly said so. I mentally filed that away. The year passed with almost no issues except for one winter disaster. The water heater failed in the middle of a brutal cold snap. The townhouse turned into a giant refrigerated box. I called the management company. They took days to get someone out, and I ended up staying in a hotel for 3 nights. I told the landlord I'd be deducting the hotel cost from that month's rent. He verbally agreed, and it was never a fight. As the end of the lease approached, the landlord asked whether I wanted to renew. I did. The location was ideal, and I didn't want to uproot myself again. A week later, the management company sent over a renewal document, another one-year lease, same rent, same terms. I signed it immediately and emailed it back. Then I waited and waited. 2 full weeks went by without receiving the landlord-signed copy back. That's usually automatic. Sign, countersign, done. So I reached out. The management company told me the landlord was refusing to sign because he was mad that rent didn't arrive on the first of each month. I was stunned. I'd never paid late, not once. I always paid the management company on time or early, exactly as the lease required. That's when they dropped the bomb. Oh well, we didn't always process the rent to the landlord on time. He's upset with us, so he wants you to pay $100 more a month. Excuse me? I asked them how his issue with their own bookkeeping inefficiency had anything to do with me. They actually agreed it didn't, but still said the landlord wants the rent increased by $100 a month to compensate. We'll send you a revised lease. And they did, a brand new lease with the higher amount. That was all I needed to hear. The second I saw that counteroffer, I went into overdrive. I started looking for a new place that same afternoon. And unbelievably, I found one, a condo. Same ideal neighborhood, much nicer, newer, brighter, upgraded appliances, actual temperature control, the works. And the rent, $75 less per month than what I had previously been paying. Not less than the increased amount, less than the original amount. I jumped on it, ran through the background check, got approved, and received the lease. Before signing the new lease, I handled the old one cleanly and legally. I sent a certified letter to both the landlord and the management company stating that my earlier signature on the renewal, which they had never countersigned, was revoked and ineffective due to their counteroffer, the $100 rent increase. Therefore, the renewal was not accepted and could not be accepted. In contract terms, they made a counteroffer which terminates the original offer. The unsigned lease was dead. Then I signed the new condo lease. At this point, I had about 10 days left on my original contract, so I scheduled movers, packed up, cleaned the townhouse thoroughly, and prepared to hand over the keys. That's when the frantic calls started. Suddenly, the landlord and the management company were ringing my phone like it was a fire alarm. They were shocked that I was moving out. They said they'd assumed I was renewing. Yes, the same renewal they'd refused to sign. They insisted it would be impossible to find a tenant on such short notice, that they were going to lose a full month of rent, that this was unfair to them. I told them politely that none of that was my problem. They were the ones who tried to squeeze another $100 out of me. They were the ones who failed to countersign the renewal. They were the ones who created the delay. They made their bed. I simply chose to find a better one. On the final day, I handed over the keys, returned the townhouse clean and in the same condition as when I moved in, and walked away. And that beautiful new condo? Best decision I ever made. Their attempt to wring that extra $1,200 out of me cost them far more than that in vacancy. And our next story. She'd be nothing without me. This was already years ago when we first began our divorce proceedings. It was an abusive, controlling, very bad marriage, but I was in university when we met, taking courses to get into my now career. I worked through most of my degree, so I was able to pay for myself and my tuition. The last year of my degree, it became overwhelming to work at the same time, so my ex told me I should quit my job and he'd support us. Oh great, I quit. I used my savings to help with my side of the bills, did all the household chores, and made sure I held up my end of things. I graduate and get multiple job offers and start working right away. Our marriage fell apart about 7 months after I started. He had multiple affairs, plus the abuse and everything else. I left and went no contact. Our first time seeing each other was 15 months later at a mediation meeting with our respective lawyers. It only took him about 15 minutes to begin shouting and cursing at me, and then he demanded all my income, saying she would be nowhere without me. I gave her her career. I only helped with the expectation that I would be reaping the benefits of her salary for the foreseeable future. Basically, both lawyers were dumbfounded, and his scrambled to get him to stop talking. I still chuckle to myself when I think about that meeting, as terrifying as it was at the time. It's funny to think about now. Edit. Since I've been asked a few times how things went with my ex representing himself, honestly, I'm still not sure if it helped or hurt me in the end. It definitely made the process more frustrating. He'd get ideas in his head like the one I shared, and without a lawyer to explain why something wasn't legal or realistic, it was nearly impossible to get him to cooperate. Even when he was wrong, he insisted he was right. He was consistently unprepared for court dates, and while the judge gave him multiple chances with reschedules, we ultimately settled outside of court. I ended up conceding on quite a bit just to get it over with. He still ended up owing me money and failed to follow through on parts of the separation agreement. We had to return to court, where I got a judgment for damages, court costs, and the outstanding amount. There are liens on his assets now, so hopefully I'll be paid out soon and can finally close that chapter. I didn't come out ahead financially. It mostly covered the business debt he put on my credit card, my legal fees, and gave me a clean slate. The experience reminds me of that old saying, never play chess with a pigeon. It knocks over the pieces, poops on the board, and struts around like it won. The fact that both lawyers were dumbfounded, that his own lawyer was scrambling to shut him up, tells you everything. He wasn't just making a bad legal argument. He was confessing to his entire worldview in a room of witnesses. It's terrifying, yes, but you're right to chuckle about it now. There's a dark comedy in someone so thoroughly exposing their own villainy. And our last story, the hunters who messed with the wrong mom. I grew up in the countryside of Tuscany, way out where the houses were far apart and the land stretched for what felt like forever. Our backyard alone was nearly a mile long, tall grass, snakes, a fox or two, and way more nature than any kid needed. We only used maybe a quarter of it for actual play, but the whole thing was still our property, and we took pride in it. One afternoon, while my sister and I were messing around near the top of the hill, we froze. Two men with rifles casually walked straight onto our land. No knocking, no calling out, just walked down the hill into our backyard. My sister whispered, "Are those hunters?" I whispered back, "Why does he have a shotgun if he's wearing Crocs?" Before I could make another joke, my mom stormed out of the house faster than I'd ever seen her move. "Hey, you can't be back there," she shouted across the yard. The hunters paused just long enough to glance at her, then ignored her completely. One waved her off like she was a stray cat. "Mind your business." Wrong answer. She called the police, but rural cops take their sweet time, usually half an hour if you're lucky, an hour if they're busy, which usually means they're eating pastries. Mom knew help wasn't coming anytime soon. She turned to us, "Stay here." Mom marched back inside. I thought she was grabbing binoculars or her phone to record them, or maybe a neighbor. Nope, she came out holding a full-on sledgehammer. There was a small dirt parking area next to our house where locals sometimes left their cars. The hunters had parked both their vehicles there. Mom didn't hesitate. She walked right up to the nearest car, raised the sledgehammer above her head. Wham! The windshield cracked like ice. Wham! The hood caved in. Wham! The entire car looked like a crushed soda can. Our elderly neighbor, who spent most afternoons sitting outside watching everything like it was live theater, started laughing so hard he nearly tipped over in his chair. Mom didn't even acknowledge him. She was laser-focused on turning that car into modern art. By the time she stepped back, the vehicle was completely unrecognizable. A few minutes later, the hunters came trudging back up the hill and stopped dead. The arguing started immediately. "Your car's totaled." "No, that's your car." "No way, you parked there?" They went back and forth until one of them finally stormed off down the road, probably needing a long walk to contemplate his life choices. The other stayed and started pacing in front of our house with his rifle slung over his shoulder, trying to look intimidating. Mom? She just started mowing the lawn. Calm, methodical, like she hadn't just annihilated a man's car with brute force. The hunter eventually went to question our neighbor. "You see anyone come near the cars?" Neighbor shrugged. "Nope." Finally, the second hunter left too, probably realizing that picking a fight with a furious suburban mom armed with a sledgehammer was a terrible idea. 20 minutes later, the police finally arrived. Mom explained everything. Two armed trespassers walked onto private land without permission, refused to leave, and behaved aggressively. She filed an official report. The cops didn't ask about the car. Mom didn't offer information. Neighbor didn't say a word. A week after the incident, Mom had a sturdy new fence installed around the entire lower end of the property with a sign on it, "Private property, no trespassing." To this day, whenever the story gets brought up at family gatherings, someone always retells it with dramatic flair, and every single time the punchline is the same. Those hunters came looking for game and instead discovered why you never piss off a mom who owns her land. and a sledgehammer. Your mom didn't go looking for trouble, she reacted to it. Two armed strangers entered her property, disrespected her attempts to intervene, and ignored every boundary she set. In rural areas, you can't afford to pretend that isn't a threat. She protected her family and her home in the way she judged safest and most effective at the time. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.